The Napoleon Paradox. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this quiet corner of the internet, a sanctuary, I hope, where we collectively dare to pick apart the very fabric of human experience, illuminated by the timeless, often unsettling, glow of truly great literature. Or, if you're just tuning in for the very first time, consider this your urgent invitation, your gentle, or perhaps, as we delve deeper, not so gentle, intellectual push into a world of ideas so profound, so inherently unsettling, that they possess an almost uncanny ability to linger, to haunt your thoughts long after you've closed the book, long after the screen goes dark, long after you've tried to shake them off. Today, my friends, we are not merely discussing a classic novel, we are directly confronting a foundational, agonizingly persistent human dilemma, a philosophical abyss that has, throughout recorded history, swallowed empires whole, justified countless unspeakable atrocities, and continues to echo with chilling clarity in the grandest halls of power, in the hushed chambers of secret societies, and most acutely, in the solitary, often tormented, chambers of the individual human heart. It's a question that, when truly, honestly contemplated without pretense or immediate moral comfort, can feel like a cold, relentless chisel chipping away at the very bedrock of our deepest, most cherished moral certainties. Let's not engage in rhetorical acrobatics or intellectual evasion, shall we? Let's just lay it out there, stark, raw, and utterly uncompromising, and let it hang in the air between us, demanding not just a superficial response, but an answer born from the very core of your being. If you possess the absolute, undeniable certainty, the unquestionable, divinely confirmed knowledge, that by eliminating one single, truly noxious individual, one person whose very existence was, without a shadow of a doubt, a constant, pervasive, undeniable source of suffering, corruption, and systemic harm to an entire community, an entire segment of society, you could thereby unequivocally save the lives, or dramatically and tangibly enhance the well-being, the flourishing, the very future, of not just a few, but 100, or even 1,000, demonstrably good, innocent, deserving people. Would you, personally, be the one to undertake that act? Would you be the one to make that ultimate, irreversible choice, to get your hands dirty, to wield the instrument of fate? Take a deep breath. Pause. Really let that hypothetical scenario sink its chilling, probing teeth into the quietest corners of your mind. Do not immediately reach for the familiar, comforting blanket of no, never, under any circumstances, or the convenient, often cowardly, shield of it's far too complicated to answer. For a fleeting, brave moment, set aside the societal programming you've absorbed since childhood, the intricate legal ramifications you've been taught, the various religious doctrines that offer solace and guidance. Imagine, with painstaking, almost unbearable clarity, this singular individual, a relentless predator, a master manipulator, a purely parasitic force systematically draining the vitality, the joy, the hope from everyone they touch. They are, in this meticulously constructed thought experiment, unequivocally, irredeemably bad, not just flawed, not merely misguided, but actively, demonstrably destructive, an unyielding malignancy. And now, with equal vividness, visualize the potential, undeniably positive cascade of outcomes that would undoubtedly flow from their calculated, deliberate absence, entire families healed from generations of abuse, struggling businesses saved from ruin, innovative ideas allowed to flourish, artistic expressions unleashed, entire communities breathing a collective, profound sigh of relief, flourishing anew, unburdened by this pervasive weight. The moral arithmetic, at first glance, seems almost disturbingly simple, doesn't it? One life, a recognized source of profound, widespread negativity, traded for 100, 1,000, potentially 10,000 lives imbued. Intro and the narrator's lens. Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Or if this is your first time joining us, a very warm welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're embarking on a journey, a descent, perhaps into one of the most profound and unsettling landscapes ever put to paper, Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Now, before we even crack open the binding, I want you to close your eyes for a moment, if you can, and just feel what I'm about to describe. Immerse yourself in it. Picture St. Petersburg, Russia. The year is 1865. But forget the grand palaces and shimmering canals for a moment. Instead, imagine the summer heat. It's not just warm, it's a living, breathing entity, a suffocating blanket pressing down on everything. The air is thick, stagnant, heavy with dust that seems to cling to your very lungs. It's the kind of heat that makes thought sluggish, that breeds irritability and a feverish restlessness. And then, there's the smell. Oh, the smell. It's an assault on the senses, a symphony of urban decay. The cloying sweetness of stale beer mixes with the sharp tang of cheap vodka from overcrowded taverns. There's the ever-present stench of the canals, which double as open sewers, carrying the city's filth. The pervasive odor of unwashed bodies, poverty, and desperation hangs heavy in the narrow, sun-baked streets. Imagine the acrid smoke from the communal kitchens, the sweat-soaked linen, the lingering, indefinable miasma of human misery that permeates the very brick and mortar of the tenement buildings. It's not just unpleasant, it's oppressive, almost physically sickening. This isn't just a backdrop, you see. St. Petersburg in Crime and Punishment is a character in itself. It's a vast, sprawling, festering organism, an active participant in the drama that unfolds. It's a city that seethes, that whispers temptations, that presses down on its inhabitants until their very minds become as cramped and stifled as the dark, urine-stained stairwells and tiny, coffin-like rooms they inhabit. It's a pressure cooker, a crucible where morality buckles under the strain of poverty and intellectual ferment. The heat saps your will, the stench pollutes your spirit, and the sheer claustrophobia of it all makes irrational thought seem almost logical. For our protagonist, Raskolnikov, this city isn't merely the place where he commits his crime, it is an accomplice, a mirror reflecting his own torment, amplifying his despair, and even, perhaps, driving him towards his terrible deed. The dust and the suffocating air become an extension of his own fevered, fractured mind. And it's into that world, that precise atmosphere of suffocating heat, moral ambiguity, and intellectual upheaval, that I want to guide you. My role here isn't just to tell you the story of Crime and Punishment, you can read that for yourself, and I profoundly encourage you to do so. No, my purpose, my lens for this incredible work, is to be a guide through the labyrinthine corridors of the human soul itself. We're not just going to dissect plot points or analyze character motivations in a superficial way. We're going deeper. We're going to peel back the layers of Raskolnikov's tormented psyche, to explore the philosophical underpinnings of his actions, to grapple with the terrifying implications of a mind that believes itself above conventional morality. This is a journey into the darkest corners of human thought, where grand theories collide with raw, visceral emotion, where pride battles conscience, and where the search for meaning often leads to horrifying despair. I approach Dostoevsky not just as a literary critic, but as someone deeply, fundamentally fascinated by the existential questions he poses. What does it mean to be truly free? What is the nature of suffering, and can it lead to redemption? Where do we draw the line between justice and vengeance, between intellectual arrogance and genuine insight? These aren't just abstract ideas, Dostoevsky dramatizes them in the flesh and blood of his characters, making them terrifyingly real, painfully relatable. So, consider me yo. Chapter 1, The Theory of Extraordinary Men. Alright, welcome back. If you're just joining us, you've stepped right into the heart of the storm, the very crucible of Rodion Raskolnikov's tortured mind. We're about to peel back the layers of his intellect, to confront the chilling, yet oddly compelling, philosophical framework he constructs to justify the unthinkable. This isn't just some abstract musing, this is the intellectual gunpowder that detonates the entire narrative of crime and punishment. Before he even lifts the axe, Raskolnikov has already committed the ultimate intellectual transgression. He's written an article, published anonymously, that lays out a theory so audacious, so utterly devoid of conventional morality, that it sends shivers down your spine just contemplating it. This isn't just a young man grappling with poverty or desperation. This is a brilliant, arrogant, and deeply disturbed mind attempting to rationalize evil, to elevate it into a form of perverse societal progress. And that, my friends, is where the real danger lies. So, let's dive deep, shall we, into what Raskolnikov calls the theory of extraordinary men. Imagine, if you will, the world neatly divided into two distinct categories of human beings. Not by race, not by wealth, not even by social standing, but by a perceived inherent capacity for what Raskolnikov deems progress. This is the bedrock of his entire thesis. On one side, you have the ordinary people. He sometimes refers to them as the material, or even, in his darker moments, as lice or drones. These are, by his definition, conservative by nature. Their primary function, he posits, is to maintain the status quo, to live in obedience, to conform to the established laws and traditions of society. They are the vast majority, the perpetuators of the species, the ones who follow, who accept, who are inherently submissive to authority. They lack, in his view, the capacity for original thought, for breaking new ground. Their moral compass is entirely external, dictated by society, by religion, by the fear of punishment. They are, essentially, a means to an end, a backdrop against which the truly important individuals can play out their destiny. Think of it like this: they are the bricks, the mortar, the very ground upon which civilization is built, but they are not the architects. They are not the ones with the vision. And then, on the other side, you have the extraordinary people. These are the chosen few, the movers of the world, the men of genius, the innovators. These are the individuals, Raskolnikov argues, who possess an innate right, no, more than a right, a duty, to transgress existing laws, to smash old conventions, to literally destroy the present in the name of the future. Their purpose isn't to perpetuate, but to innovate, not to conform, but to create, not to obey, but to dictate. They are the ones who say new words, who bring about societal change, who push humanity forward, often through revolutionary, even violent, means. Now, here's the crucial, truly chilling part. Raskolnikov argues that for these extraordinary men, moral laws, the very rules that bind the ordinary, are merely obstacles. If the advancement of their new word, their grand vision, necessitates the stepping over of moral boundaries, even the shedding of blood, then they are not only justified but obligated to do so. Think about it. This is not just an allowance for moral transgression, it's a mandate. He cites historical figures like Napoleon, Mohammed, Lycurgus, and Solon, great leaders, lawgivers, conquerors, arguing that their achievements, their new words, could only have come about by transgressing the established norms, by literally walking over corpses if necessary, to clear the path for their vision. What strikes me here, and what I think Dostoevsky is so brilliantly dissecting, is the seductive power of this ideology. For a young, intelligent, alienated mind, especially one feeling the crushing weight of poverty and societal neglect, the idea that you might be one of these extraordinary individuals. Chapter 2. Poverty and Desperation. Alright, so we've spent a good chunk of time diving into Raskolnikov's mind, didn't we? That labyrinth of his theories, his feverish dreams, the unsettling cocktail of intellectual arrogance and profound, almost pathological alienation. But here's the thing about crime and punishment: Dostoevsky, master that he is, isn't going to let us stay cooped up in Raskolnikov's suffocating little room, no matter how compelling his thoughts are. Because to truly understand why he eventually takes that fateful step, we have to pull back the curtain and look at the world pressing in on him, the relentless, crushing external pressures that don't just influence his internal chaos, but actively fuel it, transforming abstract theory into horrifying, urgent necessity. Think of it like this: Raskolnikov's mind is a pressure cooker, right? And what we're about to explore are the intense flames licking at its base, threatening to blow the lid right off. These aren't just minor inconveniences, they are existential threats to his dignity, his sanity, and to the very people he loves. It's the point where the outside world, in all its brutal indifference, crashes head-on with his internal turmoil, providing both the final push and, in his distorted view, the ultimate justification. Our first foray into this external torment takes us, rather fittingly, to a dingy tavern. The air is thick with the stale ghosts of cheap beer, coarse tobacco, and the unspoken desperation of its patrons. It's here, amidst the grime and the clatter, that Raskolnikov encounters one of the most unforgettable characters in all of literature, Semyon Zakharovich Marmeladov. Now, Marmeladov is a spectacle. He's a former civil servant, a man who once had a life, a family, a respectable, if modest, position. but he's lost it all to drink. When Raskolnikov spots him, Marmeladov is already deep in his cups, his face bloated and red, his clothes threadbare, yet there's a strange, almost theatrical dignity in his misery. He needs to confess, he craves an audience for his humiliation, and Raskolnikov, silent and observant, becomes just that. Marmeladov, with a mournful, almost poetic eloquence that completely belies his drunken state, begins to spin his agonizing tale of utter degradation. He paints a vivid, heartbreaking picture of his family, his second wife, Katerina Ivanovna, a proud, consumptive woman, driven to madness by relentless poverty and her husband's weakness, constantly reminding him of her aristocratic past and the sheer misery he's brought upon her and her children from a previous marriage. He describes the rags they wear, the hunger in their bellies, the constant, soul-crushing humiliation that eats away at their very souls. It's a vision of human suffering so profound, so inescapable, that it feels almost biblical. But then, he comes to Sonia. Ah, Sonia. My heart aches every single time I reread this passage, and I imagine yours does too. Marmeladov confesses, with a heartbreaking mixture of shame and despair, that his gentle daughter, Sonia, forced by their abject poverty, has had to become a prostitute. He tells Raskolnikov, his voice thick with tears and cheap vodka, how Sonia, a pure, pious girl, literally goes out into the streets to sell herself, to bring home the paltry sum that keeps them from starving. He describes how she brings home the money, lays it silently on the table, and how even then, he takes it, he drinks it away. He is a monster, he proclaims, he knows it, and yet he cannot stop. Poverty is not a vice, sir, he laments, his voice cracking, but destitution, sir, is a vice. In poverty you may still preserve the nobleness of your inborn feelings, but in destitution no one ever does. This is a gut punch. A direct, unfiltered look into the abyss that Raskolnikov himself is teetering on the edge of. He sees the utter obliteration of human dignity, the monstrous choices forced upon the innocent, the self-perpetuating cycle of despair. And what truly hits home is Marmeladov's searing self-awareness. He knows he's a villain, he hates himself for. But now, the letter excitedly, yet with an undertone of palpable desperation, announces new tidings. Dunya is engaged. My dearest Rodion, his mother writes, her words carrying the faint scent of hope mixed with profound anxiety, I hurry to tell you that at last your Dunya has decided to get married. And I dare say, a very good match indeed. Peter Petrovich Luzhin, a distant relative of our late master, is a gentleman of considerable means and excellent prospects, a civil counselor already, and destined for great things. He is a practical man, and very sensible, though perhaps a little severe. He is, however, eager to marry an educated and attractive girl, but one without dowry, as he says he prefers to raise his wife from poverty, so that she might always appreciate what she owes him. Narrator returns to normal tone, Raskolnikov pauses, the paper trembling slightly in his hand, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Raise his wife from poverty, so that she might always appreciate what she owes him. That phrase alone, utterly devoid of genuine affection or partnership, tells us everything we need to know about Luzhin. He isn't seeking a partner, he's seeking a grateful dependent, a beautiful ornament he can mold and control. A perpetual debtor. Of course, his mother continues, her handwriting growing slightly more hurried. There have been a few rather particular conditions. He wants to marry soon, and very quietly, without much fuss. And he has expressed a wish that you, my dear Rodion, would not attend the wedding, at least not initially, for he thinks you still hold to some of your radical student ideas, and he wants no awkwardness. He promises, however, to help you complete your studies, and even secure a position for you once you are married, for he is a man of influence. He has even offered to pay for our journey to Petersburg, where the wedding will take place, and where he will reside. Raskolnikov's blood boils. This isn't just an offer, it's a cynical purchase. Luzhin isn't just marrying Dunya, he's buying her, and her family, out of their desperation. And the condition about Raskolnikov? A clear attempt to sever ties, to isolate Dunya, to ensure his own dominance. It's a calculated insult, a deliberate emasculation of Raskolnikov, a blatant declaration that he is an obstacle, a liability. Oh, Rodion, my dear, his mother's handwriting, usually so neat, grows more agitated here, as if her true feelings are finally breaking through. You mustn't worry about me. Dunya insists that this is for our good, for your future. She says she is making this sacrifice for you, so that you can finish your university, so that you can have a better life, a life worthy of your intellect. She has always loved you so devotedly, Rodion, and she believes this is the only way forward for all of us. She sees it as her duty. We will bring a little happiness to her, won't we? She deserves so much more. But this is our only hope, my son. Narrator returns to normal tone. She is making this sacrifice for you. That sentence echoes in the small, stifling room, reverberating in Raskolnikov's mind like a death knell. Dunya, his proud, intelligent sister, is about to sell herself into a life of quiet subservience, not for love, not for passion, but for the cold, hard currency of financial security, and all for him. Just like Sonia, forced to sell her body on the streets, Dunya is being forced to sell her life, her happiness, her autonomy, in a marriage that is little more than a respectable, socially acceptable form of prostitution. The very essence of her being is being bartered away. This is the ultimate, unbearable humiliation. His family, reduced to such dire straits that his beloved sister must sacrifice her very essence for his sake. His pride is shattered, his sense of self-worth annihilated. He, the brilliant, the extraordinary, the one destined for great things, is the very burden that forces such a terrible choice upon those he cherishes. It's an unbearable weight, a searing brand on his soul. This horrific conf. Chapter 3, Crossing the Rubicon. Alright, buckle up everyone. Because what we're about to dive into isn't just a pivotal moment in crime and punishment, it's one of the most viscerally unsettling, brutally honest portrayals of a single, catastrophic act in all of literature. We've spent so much time inside Raskolnikov's head, witnessing the intricate, tortured dance of his theory, his rationalizations, his philosophical wrestling match with himself. We've seen him build this elaborate mental fortress, brick by brick, justifying the unjustifiable. But now, the time for thought is over. The time for action is here. And as we'll see, the elegant geometry of his theory is about to collide head-on with the messy, terrifying, and utterly unpredictable reality of human experience. This is it. This is Chapter 3, Crossing the Rubicon. And in this segment, we're going to witness the murder scene itself, and the immediate, shattering impact it has on Raskolnikov's carefully constructed world. The moments leading up to the act are pure, unadulterated psychological horror. Dostoevsky, in his genius, doesn't just tell us Raskolnikov is nervous, he makes us feel it. Imagine Raskolnikov, having meticulously planned this, or so he thought, now making his way up the creaking, ancient staircase of the pawnbroker's building. Every step is an auditory assault. Creak. 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 Each sound amplified in the suffocating silence, each a potential betrayal. His heart, he tells us, is pounding like a hammer. And you know that feeling, don't you? That feeling when your own body becomes an enemy, betraying your calm, amplifying your fear. He's not just walking, he's ascending into an abyss. His hands are trembling, slick with sweat. He checks his pockets, is the axe still there, tucked away? Is the loop of cord he prepared, the faux object of his pawn, still secure? He's a man possessed by a fever, a chill running through his bones even as his brow beads with sweat. Every shadow seems to hold a watching eye, every whisper of the wind sounds like a voice calling out his name. The mundane details of the staircase, the peeling paint, the worn banister, the smell of damp and dust, they all conspire to heighten the tension, rooting us in this grim reality. And yet, there's this strange duality. Even in this state of terror, a part of him is still clinging to that intellectual arrogance, that sense of being above the common herd, that he is an extraordinary man capable of transcending conventional morality. He's telling himself this is necessary, this is for the greater good, this is for him. But the trembling hands, the racing pulse, the dry mouth, they tell a different story. They tell the story of a fragile human being, teetering on the edge of an irreversible precipice. He finally reaches the door. He knocks. The silence that follows must have been unbearable. Then, the sound of movement inside. The door opens a crack, and there she is, Alyona Ivanovna, the old pawnbroker. Suspicious, frail, a louse in his grand theory. But in this moment, she's just an old woman. And then, it happens. The theory, the philosophy, the intellectual edifice, it all collapses in a single, brutal moment. The axe flashes. There's no eloquent debate, no last-minute reprieve. Just the swift, horrifying reality of metal meeting flesh. Dostoevsky doesn't shy away from the gruesomeness, though he implies more than he graphically describes, which makes it even more potent. We feel the impact, the sickening thud. And then, another. And another. The old woman falls, almost silently. The act is done. But this isn't the end of the horror. This is just the beginning of the unraveling. Raskolnikov, in a daze, begins to rummage through her belongings. He's trying to stick to the plan, trying to justify the act by securing the spoils. but his hands are fumbling, his mind racing. He's no longer the cool, calculating Superman. He's a terrified, adrenaline-fueled wreck. He's forgotten the careful preparations, the elaborate cover stories. All he can think about is getting out. And then, the sound. A fa. Chapter 4, The Fever Dream. Alright, welcome back, fellow travelers into the labyrinth of the human soul. If you're just joining us, you might want to rewind a bit, because we've just witnessed something truly horrifying. Raskolnikov, in his desperate attempt to prove a theory, to himself, to the world, has committed murder. Not one, but 2 lives brutally taken. The old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, and her innocent sister, Lizaveta. He's escaped the scene, but as we saw, it was a close call. A truly agonizing, heart-pounding sequence that left him breathless, shaking, and fundamentally altered. And now, here we are, at a crucial juncture in our journey through crime and punishment. We've crossed the threshold of the physical act, and Dostoevsky, in his masterful way, immediately thrusts us into the physiological and psychological aftermath of guilt. This isn't just about escaping the police, it's about escaping the self. It's about the internal collapse that begins the moment the axe falls. We're stepping into chapter 4, which I've titled, rather fittingly, The Fever Dream. Think about it for a moment. What happens to a person who has committed such an act? The immediate adrenaline rush fades, leaving behind an unbearable void. The body, pushed to its absolute limits by terror, by the frantic planning and execution, by the sheer moral transgression, finally gives way. And that's precisely where we find Raskolnikov. He returns to his cramped, coffin-like room, those stolen items still clutched in his hand, a tangible, terrifying link to the horror he's just perpetrated. But the exhaustion, the sheer trauma, it's too much. His body, his mind, they simply rebel. What follows is a descent into a profound delirium and days of unconsciousness. Dostoevsky paints a picture of utter physical and mental dissolution. Raskolnikov falls into a deep, feverish sleep, a stupor that isn't restorative but rather a violent, internal war. He wakes and sleeps, wakes and sleeps, and the lines between them blur into a terrifying continuum. His fever soars, his body racked with chills and sweats. His mind, already fractured by his grand, terrible theory, now shatters completely under the weight of his crime. He's tossed on a stormy sea of hallucination and half-memory. The world outside his window, the familiar sounds of St. Petersburg, the street vendors, the distant cries, the clatter of carriages, they all become distorted, menacing, part of the relentless hum inside his head. He's not truly present in the world. He's adrift in a landscape of fragmented thoughts, nonsensical visions, and disjointed conversations that aren't really happening. He mumbles, he groans, he struggles to piece together what's real and what's a figment of his tormented imagination. The murder itself, though the cause of his illness, recedes and then lunges back into his awareness with terrifying clarity, only to dissolve again into a chaotic jumble. He might see the old woman's face, or the glint of the axe, or hear Lizaveta's whimpering, but these images are always just beyond his grasp, shifting and morphing like phantoms. It's not just a physical illness, you see. It's the physical manifestation of his soul's torment. His body is literally reacting to the immense psychological burden. It's as if his system is trying to purge itself of the poison he's ingested. This isn't a quick fever that breaks after a day or two. Dostoevsky implies days upon days of this semi-conscious state, where time loses all meaning. Who is tending to him? Who knows he's even sick? This isolation, this complete severance from reality, only intensifies the horror. He's alone with his crime, alone with his sickness, alone with his guilt, even if he hasn't fully acknowledged it as guilt in the traditional sense yet. From a personal perspective, I find this depiction incredibly potent. We've all experienced some form of illness, perhaps a bad fever that makes the world feel surreal, where time stretches and compresses. But imagine that, amplified 1,000-fold, with the unspeakable weight of murder at its seat. Every time he hears a sound outside his door, every time there's a whisper in the hallway, his paranoia spikes. He's convinced it's the police, that someone has seen him, that the world is closing in. Is the knock real? Is it part of the fever dream? Dostoevsky masterfully blurs these lines, leaving us, the readers, in the same state of disoriented terror as Raskolnikov. He lives in a constant state of impending doom, where every shadow holds a lurking policeman, every sound is a summons, every stranger's glance is an accusation. This is the nature of paranoia, isn't it? Guilt doesn't just make you fearful, it warps your perception of reality. It turns innocent events into signs of your imminent downfall. A casual conversation overheard outside his door becomes a hushed conspiracy against him. A neighbor's fleeting glance becomes a knowing stare. For me, this perfectly captures the isolating power of guilt. When you carry such a secret, your inner world becomes a prison. You project your own anxieties onto everyone and everything around you. You scrutinize your own actions, replaying them endlessly, and you imagine the same scrutiny from others. Raskolnikov's paranoia is not just a symptom of his illness, it's the active, ongoing punishment for his crime. He is, in essence, being tortured by his own mind. Long pause, slight shift in tone, but in the midst of this terrifying internal chaos, a beacon of humanity arrives. A force of nature, really. This brings us to our third crucial point, the introduction, or rather, the reintroduction, of Razumihin as the voice of sanity and friendship. Razumihin. What a breath of fresh air, or perhaps more accurately, a gale force wind of practicality and boisterous loyalty, in the suffocating atmosphere of Raskolnikov's room. Razumihin is Raskolnikov's only true friend, a former university comrade, and he couldn't be more different from our brooding, intellectual protagonist. Where Raskolnikov is pale, gaunt, and consumed by abstract theories, Razumihin is robust, energetic, direct, and incredibly kind-hearted. He's a man of action, a man of the people, grounded in reality. He bursts into Raskolnikov's life when our anti-hero is at his absolute lowest, completely unaware of the horror Raskolnikov has just committed. Razumihin hears of his friend's illness. Raskolnikov had sent him a note before the murder, asking for money, which Razumihin, in his typical generous fashion, had secured. But when he finally comes calling, he finds Raskolnikov in a terrible state. What does Razumihin do? He doesn't judge, He doesn't question Raskolnikov's strange ramblings, not yet, at least. He simply acts. He brings a doctor, he provides food, he cleans the room, he arranges for proper care. He's pragmatic, efficient, and deeply, genuinely concerned. He even insists on tending to Raskolnikov himself, despite his own meager means and busy life. He offers a connection to the outside world, a lifeline of simple human kindness that Raskolnikov desperately needs but often pushes away with his irritability and suspicion. Razumian's presence is a powerful contrast to Raskolnikov's internal isolation. While Raskolnikov is spiraling into paranoia and self-destruction, Razumian offers a stable, unwavering point of reference. He represents everything Raskolnikov has tried to reject: community, compassion, simple goodness. He is the embodiment of common sense, the voice of reason that cuts through the fever-induced fog and the intellectual arrogance that led Raskolnikov down his dark path. Think about the importance of such a friend in times of crisis. When one is at their absolute lowest, physically and mentally broken, a true friend doesn't ask questions, at first, doesn't demand explanations, but simply shows up and helps. Razumian doesn't just care for Raskolnikov's physical needs, he represents the possibility of redemption through human connection, a concept that Raskolnikov, in his detached intellectualism, has largely discarded. He is the first hint that Raskolnikov isn't completely alone, that the Chapter 5, Cat and Mouse. Alright, so we've journeyed through Raskolnikov's initial descent, the suffocating atmosphere of St. Petersburg, and the horrifying act itself. We've seen him grapple with the immediate aftermath, the fever, the paranoia, the desperate attempts to justify what he's done. But now, the true battle begins. The intellectual and psychological arena opens up, and our protagonist is about to meet his match, a man whose mind is as labyrinthine as Raskolnikov's own, but who operates from a position of power and terrifying insight. Welcome to Chapter 5, Cat and Mouse. And if you thought the murder scene was intense, just wait. This is where Dostoevsky truly flexes his muscles as a psychological novelist. Our focus here is the first interrogation scene, a masterpiece of tension and subtle torment, where Raskolnikov squares off against the formidable examining magistrate, Porfiry Petrovich. This isn't just a conversation, it's a cerebral duel, a dance of wits where every gesture, every pause, every word carries immense weight. Raskolnikov, driven by a mixture of morbid curiosity, a strange compulsion to test fate, and perhaps a subconscious, almost masochistic desire to be caught, makes his way to the police station. He's ostensibly there to inquire about his pawned watch and ring, items he'd pawned with the murdered old pawnbroker. But we, and implicitly Porfiry, know there's more to it. He's drawn to the flame, a moth to the very light that threatens to expose him, his entire being vibrating with a desperate need for resolution, even if that resolution means his own downfall. When he finally comes face to face with Porfiry Petrovich, what does he find? Not the stern, accusatory figure he might have anticipated. Oh no. That would be too simple for Dostoevsky. The brilliance lies in the unexpected. Porfiry plays dumb, the unassuming predator's subtle net. Porfiry Petrovich, in his initial presentation, is anything but intimidating. He's described as a man of about 35, rather stout, with a round, somewhat feminine face, and a strangely youthful appearance that belies a razor-sharp intellect. He's affable, almost jovial, with a nervous laugh that sounds more like a titter, and a constant habit of rubbing his hands together, a gesture that could be seen as fidgety, or perhaps, a sign of barely contained anticipation. He's full of polite apologies and seemingly endless small talk. He offers Raskolnikov tea, cigarettes, engages in a meandering conversation about local gossip and mutual acquaintances, even discussing Raskolnikov's friends, Razumikin and Zamyatov. And this, my friends, is his first, brilliant move. He plays dumb. Or rather, he plays the role of the unassuming, slightly eccentric, genuinely friendly government official. He doesn't immediately pounce. He doesn't accuse. Instead, he creates an atmosphere of disarming normalcy, of pleasant, innocuous conversation. He wants Raskolnikov to relax, to drop his guard, to believe he's simply having a casual chat with a rather agreeable fellow. It's a deliberate tactic to lower Raskolnikov's defenses, to encourage him to reveal himself through a false sense of security. Think of it like this: Raskolnikov walks in, his nerves frayed, his mind a battlefield of guilt and defiance, expecting an immediate assault. He anticipates a direct confrontation, a verbal boxing match. Instead, he's met with a warm, almost solicitous welcome, a conversational equivalent of a comfortable armchair and a cup of tea. It's like walking into a trap disguised as a living room. Porfiry asks seemingly innocent questions, always circling back, always with an implied double meaning that Raskolnikov, with his hyper-alert, guilty conscience, can't help but pick up on. Each seemingly benign query is a subtle probe, testing the waters, gauging Raskolnikov's reactions. Porfiry brings up the pawned items. "Ah, yes, your things," he says, with a casual wave of his hand, as if just remembering an insignificant detail. Funny how things like that turn up, eh? A pawned silver watch, a ring, little trinky. His carefully constructed facade shatters in an instant. This article, titled On Crime, was published in an obscure periodical. Raskolnikov had dismissed it as a forgotten youthful intellectual exercise, a piece of academic bravado. He never imagined anyone, least of all a police magistrate investigating a double murder, would have read it, let alone remembered it, or connected it to him. His blood runs cold, a sudden, terrifying realization that he has been seen, utterly and completely. And Porfiry doesn't just remember it, he knows it intimately. He proceeds to discuss its central thesis, Raskolnikov's audacious theory of extraordinary men and ordinary men. The extraordinary, he explains with an almost scholarly air, are a select few, the Napoleons, the Solons, the Newtons, the lawgivers and revolutionary figures who possess the inner right, the moral prerogative, to transgress existing moral laws, even to shed blood, if it's deemed necessary for a greater good, for the advancement of humanity. The ordinary men, on the other hand, are merely material, meant to obey, to perpetuate the species, to follow the rules, to be the obedient fodder for the progress driven by the extraordinary. Porfiry, leaning forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Raskolnikov's, asks directly, but with that same disarming smile, "So, You believe then, Rodion Romanovich, that an extraordinary man, if he were to find it necessary for his idea, could, for instance, without remorse, without consequence, step over a dead body? Or even, let us say, over two dead bodies? The question hangs in the air, thick, palpable, heavy with unspoken meaning. It's not a question about abstract philosophy anymore. It's a direct, searing probe into Raskolnikov's very soul, into the precise justification he used for the murder of Alyona Ivanovna and Lizaveta. Porfiry doesn't need to say, "Did you murder them because of this theory?" He doesn't need to. The implication is deafening. Raskolnikov feels his own theory, his intellectual refuge, turned into a weapon against him, reflecting his crime back at him with terrifying clarity. Raskolnikov, caught in this intellectual trap, tries desperately to backtrack, to explain, to dilute his theory, to claim it was merely a theoretical exercise, a youthful indiscretion. But it's too late. Porfiry has laid bare the philosophical core of Raskolnikov's crime, stripping away his intellectual pretensions and revealing the horrifying, tangible implications of his ideas. He's essentially saying, "I know why you did it, and I know the twisted logic you used to rationalize it." This is not merely an interrogation, it's a profound challenge to Raskolnikov's very being, a mirroring of his own thoughts back at him, but through the terrifying lens of an investigator who has meticulously pieced together his intellectual framework. Silence and ambiguity, Porfiry's ultimate, unspoken weapon. What makes Porfiry's technique so devastatingly effective is his masterful use of silence and ambiguity. He rarely makes a direct accusation. Instead, he plants seeds of doubt and terror in Raskolnikov's mind, letting them fester and grow into full-blown paranoia. He asks a pointed question, then leans back, observing intently, his eyes never leaving Raskolnikov's face. He lets the silence stretch, forcing Raskolnikov to squirm, to fill the void, to betray himself through his frantic words, his nervous laughter, or his excruciating discomfort. He gives knowing glances, little smiles that could mean anything: amusement, pity, certainty, or perhaps even a cruel form of intellectual delight. Raskolnikov is left guessing, tormented by the uncertainty of what Porfiry truly knows, what he suspects, and what he intends to do. The lack of directness is a psychological torture in itself, far worse than any open accusation. We have our own little psychological method, you know, Porfiry remarks casually, as if talking about the weather, as if sharing a trivial trade secret. This isn't just a throwaway line, it's a declaration of psychological war, a stat. Chapter 6, The Dark Double. Okay, so we've been on this agonizing, feverish journey with Raskolnikov, haven't we? We've seen him commit the unthinkable act, witnessed the immediate, visceral psychological fallout, the crushing guilt, the delirious fever dreams, the suffocating paranoia, the profound, agonizing isolation that truly separates him from the world. We've watched his elaborate intellectual justifications for his crime, his grand theories about extraordinary men, crumble and dissolve under the relentless assault of his own conscience. But just when you, the reader, the viewer, think you've plumbed the absolute depths of human depravity and the agonizing path to potential redemption that Dostoevsky is so meticulously exploring, he introduces a character who doesn't just challenge, but utterly shatters our understanding of moral descent. A figure who forces us to re-evaluate everything we thought we knew about the human soul. Svidrigailov. The name itself, doesn't it just roll off the tongue with a certain slick, unsettling resonance? It's almost onomatopoeic for the slithering, unsettling presence he embodies. He drifts into St. Petersburg like a phantom, seemingly out of nowhere, uninvited, unannounced, yet profoundly connected to Raskolnikov's already fractured world through Dunya, his sister. From his very first, unnerving appearance, there's this palpable sense of unease he carries, a dark charisma that's both strangely fascinating and viscerally repellent. He's elegant, articulate, seemingly generous, disarmingly polite even, yet every word, every carefully modulated gesture, is coated in a thin, almost invisible veneer of something truly, fundamentally sinister. He's like a perfectly polished black mirror, reflecting only the void, and daring you to look closer. What strikes you immediately about Svidrigailov, what truly sets him apart from even the most morally compromised characters in this novel, is his utterly disturbing and absolute nihilism. Raskolnikov, remember, theorized about being beyond good and evil, about the extraordinary man possessing the inherent right, even the moral imperative, to transgress societal laws for a perceived greater good. Svidrigailov doesn't merely theorize, he lives it, embodies it with every breath. He doesn't simply flirt with the intellectual concept of a meaningless existence, he fully embraces it, wraps himself in it like a luxurious, albeit utterly suffocating, cloak. He seems to have completely shed any notion of an afterlife, famously envisioning it not as grand celestial halls of judgment or fiery infernos of damnation, but as a small room, something like a village bathhouse, grimy, with spiders in every corner. Let that image sink in for a moment. Not a grand cosmic reckoning, not eternal bliss or an epic struggle with demons, but endless, petty insignificance, a claustrophobic crawl space of mundane decay. This vision, so casually delivered, so devoid of any emotional weight, encapsulates his entire worldview. Life is small, dirty, full of trivial anxieties, ultimately fleeting, and utterly devoid of transcendent meaning. There is no moral scoreboard, no ultimate reckoning, no cosmic judge, just the dreary, relentless persistence of existence until it ends, probably quite unceremoniously, perhaps even absurdly. This isn't a man grappling with existential dread, this is a man who has fully, terrifyingly, made peace with the void, and in doing so, has hollowed himself out to an almost inhuman degree. His past is littered with whispers and accusations that echo through the narrative like chilling currents: the suspected murder of his wife, Marfa Petrovna, hinted at with chilling ambiguity and a dismissive shrug, the implied, indeed almost certain, abuse and corruption of a young, deaf servant girl, a story so vile it curdles your blood. He carries these dark rumors, this heavy baggage of past atrocities, with an almost bored indifference, as if such trivialities are beneath his notice, mere footnotes to a life he's already declared meaningless. He lives for sensual gratification, for con. His guilt is a living, breathing, festering entity, gnawing at him relentlessly, driving him to feverish delirium, plaguing him with nightmares, isolating him from every single person he cares about. His entire existence is a constant internal battle, wrestling with his grandiose theory, his crushing shame, his paralyzing fear, and a nascent, unwelcome yearning for genuine connection and, eventually, some form of redemption. His mind is a chaotic battlefield, echoing with the screams of his conscience, 1,000 unresolved anxieties. He pushes people away with cruel words, then desperately pulls them back with acts of desperate kindness. He confesses half-truths, then recoils in terror from the full implications. His very being is a testament to the fact that you cannot simply will away your moral compass without shattering yourself into a million pieces in the process. He cares, deeply and agonizingly, about the spiritual ramifications of his deed, even if he fights tooth and nail against admitting it to himself or anyone else. His journey is one of profound psychological agony, driven by a shattered idealism. Svidrigailov, on the other hand, is entirely unburdened by such psychological complexity. Where Raskolnikov is a maelstrom of internal conflict, a churning sea of ethical dilemmas, Svidrigailov is a placid, terrifying, utterly still lake. There are no moral battles raging within him, no pangs of conscience, no feverish nightmares born of guilt. His depravity isn't intellectual, it's sensual, almost clinically detached in its pursuit of gratification. His interest in Dunya, for instance, is not love, not even infatuation in the conventional sense that would imply some emotional vulnerability. It's an act of predatory acquisition, a sophisticated game of power and control, a final conquest he desires purely for the fleeting sensation of winning. He finds a perverse pleasure in the chase, in the manipulation, in the sheer act of transgression against social norms and personal boundaries. He doesn't feel the weight of his past actions, he simply recalls them, perhaps with a touch of detached amusement or mild annoyance if they complicate his current desires. He can be charming, even generously philanthropic in certain moments. He gives a substantial sum of money to Sonia, he arranges for the care of Marfa Petrovna's orphaned nieces, but these acts are utterly devoid of genuine altruism or compassion. They are either last-minute attempts to alleviate his profound, suffocating boredom, to smooth over his exit from the stage of life, or perhaps even a final, cynical exercise of power, a demonstration that even in his final moments, he can still orchestrate outcomes and manipulate lives. They are not acts of atonement, but merely pragmatic, impersonal transactions in a life he deems utterly transactional. His calm, almost chilling demeanor in the face of his own dark history and his current morally reprehensible intentions towards Dunya is what makes him so profoundly unsettling. He embodies the terrifying possibility of a human being stripped entirely bare of empathy, remorse, or any binding sense of moral obligation. He is the ultimate hedonist, but a hedonist whose pleasures have long since become stale, whose appetites are insatiable but never truly satisfied, leading only to a deeper, more profound sense of ennui. He doesn't seek meaning, he seeks only sensation, and even that is fading. He is a predator who has grown utterly bored with hunting, yet knows no other way to exist. The purity of Raskolnikov's suffering, however self-inflicted, almost makes him noble by comparison, because it proves his humanity is still intact, however fractured and bleeding. Svidrigailov, in his quiet, smiling depravity, seems to have transcended humanity altogether, becoming something colder, more calculating, and infinitely more desolate, a walking, talking testament to the void. And this is precisely where Svidrigailov truly becomes Raskolnikov's quintessential dark double, his spectral doppelganger. He is not just another vil. Chapter 7, The Lazarus Moment - Alright, welcome back to the channel, my friends. Pull up a chair, maybe grab a warm drink, because we're about to dive deep into what I consider one of the most profound and emotionally charged moments in all of literature. We're talking, of course, about Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and specifically, about a scene that reverberates with a power that's almost spiritual. Chapter 7, The Lazarus Moment. We've reached a critical juncture in our journey with Raskolnikov. Up until now, he's been trapped within the labyrinth of his own mind, a brilliant, arrogant, and utterly isolated mind. His theory, his crime, his subsequent mental torment, all these have been solitary burdens. He's pushed away everyone who tried to get close, his mother, his sister, Razumikin. He's been wandering, both physically and psychologically, through the suffocating heat and squalor of St. Petersburg, a man haunted by his own dark intellect. And then, he meets her. Sonya Marmeladov. She is, by all societal standards, the lowest of the low, a young woman forced into prostitution to feed her starving family. Yet, she radiates an inexplicable light, a purity of spirit that cuts through the grime and despair like a beacon. Raskolnikov, in his desperate need for something he can't articulate, finds himself drawn to her, almost against his own will, almost against his own logic. He seeks her out, drawn by a morbid curiosity, a desire to understand the abyss, perhaps, that she inhabitates. But what he finds is not an abyss, but a wellspring. The scene we're about to explore is nothing short of revolutionary for Raskolnikov. It's not just a conversation, it's an intervention, a spiritual assault on the very foundations of his nihilistic worldview. The reading of Lazarus, A Crack in the Ice. Imagine the setting with me for a moment. Raskolnikov, pale and agitated, sits in Sonia's small, incredibly sparse room. It's a room that speaks volumes of her poverty, yet it holds an odd sense of order, a quiet dignity that belies her profession. Raskolnikov, in his usual confrontational manner, probes her, testing the limits of her faith, her endurance. He wants to expose her hypocrisy, her weakness, to find the logical flaw in her existence. He even taunts her about her belief in God, in miracles. And this is where the magic, the true genius of Dostoevsky, unfolds. Raskolnikov, almost on a whim, asks her to read from the New Testament. Specifically, he asks for the story of Lazarus. Why Lazarus? Perhaps it's a subconscious desire to witness a resurrection, a miracle, even if he doesn't believe it. Perhaps it's another test, to see if her faith is truly as strong as it seems. Sonya hesitates. She's embarrassed, deeply private about her faith. But Raskolnikov insists, his gaze piercing, demanding. And slowly, reluctantly, she takes up the worn, leather-bound copy of the New Testament, a precious gift from Lizaveta, the very woman Raskolnikov murdered. The irony, the tragic intertwining of their fates, is almost unbearable. Her voice, at first, is trembling, barely a whisper. But as she reads, As the ancient words of the Gospel of John begin to fill that tiny room, something remarkable happens. Her voice gains strength, conviction, infused with an almost divine passion. She reads the familiar story of Mary and Martha, grieving for their brother Lazarus, who has been dead for 4 days. She reads of Jesus arriving, of Martha's desperate plea, "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." And then, she reads those earth-shattering words, "Lazarus, come forth." And just like that, the dead man rises. As Sonia reads, her face is transformed. Her eyes burn with an otherworldly light, tears stream down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of profound belief, of spiritual ecstasy. She's not just reciting words, she is experiencing the miracle, embodying the faith that makes such a miracle possible. Raskolnikov, initially cynical, mocking, is utterly captivated. He watches her, not just listening to the story, but witnessing her absolute, unwavering faith. Chapter 8, The Walls Close In. All right, settle in, folks. We're really getting into the thick of it now, aren't we? If you've been on this journey with Raskolnikov, feeling the suffocating weight of his secret, the incessant gnawing at his sanity, then this next section, what I've called Chapter 8, The Walls Close In, is where all that tension, all that meticulous psychological groundwork, finally, irrevocably, comes to a head. We're at that critical juncture, that excruciating point of no return where Raskolnikov's carefully constructed mental fortress, his desperate intellectual justifications, finally shatter, forcing upon him the stark, undeniable necessity of confession. It's a breathtaking, heartbreaking, and ultimately, profoundly redemptive moment in literature. So, let's dive into the core events and their monumental impact. Chapter 8, The Walls Close In. You know, there comes a point in any prolonged agony, whether physical or mental, when the body, or in Raskolnikov's case, the soul, simply gives out. The reserves are depleted. The will to fight, to deny, to escape, evaporates under the relentless pressure. That's exactly where we find Raskolnikov as these walls truly begin to close in. He's a man teetering on the precipice of madness, his brilliant mind, once so sharp and arrogant, now a fractured mess of guilt, paranoia, and profound isolation. He's been running on fumes, fueled by a misguided pride and a terrifying conviction in his own extraordinary nature. But Dostoevsky, in his infinite wisdom, shows us that even the most formidable intellect cannot withstand the natural moral order of the universe, or rather, the human conscience. The first, and perhaps most devastating, blow comes from the most unexpected, yet utterly inevitable, source, Porfiry Petrovich. Ah, Porfiry. He's not your typical detective, is he? No brute force, no dramatic arrests, just a quiet, unassuming, almost jovial man who understands the human psyche with chilling precision. His final confrontation with Raskolnikov isn't an interrogation in the traditional sense, it's a meticulously orchestrated psychological dismantling. Imagine the scene: Raskolnikov, expecting a final, desperate battle of wits, possibly even a physical struggle, finds himself instead in a room with a man who seems to have already won. Porfiry isn't seeking a confession through threats or trickery anymore. He's simply laying out the truth, gently, almost regretfully, but with an unshakable certainty that resonates deeper than any physical evidence ever could. Porfiry knew, from the very beginning, that Raskolnikov was his man. He didn't need witnesses or fingerprints. He needed only Raskolnikov's mind, his conscience, to do the work for him. And then, it comes. That quiet, almost whispering declaration that shatters Raskolnikov's last vestiges of defiance. It was you, Rodion Romanovich, it was you. Think about the power of those words, delivered not with triumph, but with a profound, almost sympathetic understanding. It's not an accusation hurled across a table, it's a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of a truth that has been screaming silently within Raskolnikov's own mind for months. Porfiry doesn't just say you did it, he says it was you, emphasizing the personal, inescapable nature of the crime and the guilt. What makes this moment so extraordinary is Porfiry's insight into Raskolnikov's specific brand of criminal. He understands that Raskolnikov isn't a common thief, but a man driven by a twisted philosophy, a fevered intellectual pride. And precisely because of that, Porfiry knows that Raskolnikov cannot live with his secret. He offers Raskolnikov not just a path to confession, but a path to redemption, emphasizing that suffering is the only way to cleanse his soul. He's practically begging Raskolnikov to choose life over spiritual death, to embrace the pain of exposure as a healing balm. My personal take on this scene is that it's one of the most brilliant psychological games ever written. Porfiry isn't just catching a criminal, he's saving a soul, in his own strangely. Chapter 9, Kissing the Earth. Welcome back. We're diving deep into the swirling, feverish mind of Raskolnikov. And if the last chapter felt like an endless spiral of torment and intellectual gymnastics, then what we're about to discuss is the ground floor. It's the moment of impact, the public breaking, but it's crucial to understand what kind of breaking it truly is. While the world sees a man humbling himself, Raskolnikov is still very much wrestling with his own ego. The title of this segment, Kissing the Earth, comes directly from Dostoevsky, and it captures the raw, almost primal act of public contrition that Sonia so desperately urged him towards. But what does it truly mean for Raskolnikov at this point? Imagine the Haymarket Square in mid-19th century St. Petersburg. Senaya Ploshchad. It's a chaotic, grimy, pulsating heart of the city's underbelly. Hawkers yelling, drunks stumbling, carriages clattering, the air thick with the smell of cheap food, sweat, and the perpetual dampness of the Neva. This is not some tranquil, sacred space. This is the stage for Raskolnikov's first public act of submission. He's just left Sonia, her words echoing like a tolling bell in his skull. Go to the crossroads, bow down, kiss the earth you have defiled, and tell the whole world, I am a murderer. These aren't just words, they're a sacred commandment, delivered with a quiet, unwavering conviction that Raskolnikov, despite his intellectual pride, couldn't shake. He's walked the streets of Petersburg a phantom, a ghost haunted by his own monstrous act, and by the relentless, all-seeing gaze of Porfiry Petrovich. He's been pushed to the absolute edge of his sanity. And now, he arrives at the Haymarket. The sun is shining, a cruel, indifferent brightness on such a dark soul. He feels a strange, overwhelming weakness, a physical inability to resist the pull towards this public humiliation. He doesn't understand why he's doing it, not intellectually. His theories still whisper in his ear, condemning him for this weakness. But something deeper, something beyond reason, is driving him. Perhaps it's the sheer exhaustion of resisting. Perhaps it's Sonia's love, acting as an invisible hand guiding him. Or perhaps, the first true flicker of a conscience, long buried under layers of self-deception. He walks into the middle of the square, a solitary figure in the throng. The noise, the confusion, the sheer indifference of the crowd, it all seems to amplify his own internal drama. He stops, right there, where the roads converge, a symbolic nexus point. And then, slowly, deliberately, he kneels. Think about the weight of that gesture. A man, a proud student, kneeling in the dirt, amidst the common folk he so often disdained. He bows his head, not just to the ground, but to the weight of his sin, to the judgment of God, to the silent suffering of Sonia. He feels, as Dostoevsky writes, as if he were taking upon himself all the filth and all the sin of the world. And then, he presses his lips to the cold, damp earth. A kiss. A desperate plea for forgiveness from the very ground he has stained with blood. The crowd reacts, of course. Not with universal condemnation, not with understanding, but with a mix of curiosity, confusion, and some outright derision. Some laugh. He's drunk, someone shouts. He's going to Jerusalem, another jests, misunderstanding the act as a religious pilgrimage. Children stare. Women cross themselves. But amidst the chatter and the jeers, there's also a quiet acknowledgement from some, a flicker of understanding in the eyes of those who have seen their own share of suffering and sin. It's a public spectacle, but in his mind, it's intensely private, a battle fought on hallowed ground, or rather, on ground made hallowed by his own humiliation. This is an act of profound self-abasement, tearing down the fortress of his pride, brick by agonizing brick. It's a beginning, but not an end. The kneeling, the kissing of the earth, a necessary prelude, a public performance that sets the stage. But the true, legal confession is still to come, and it's a Chapter 10, The Siberian Exile. All right, settle in, because we've reached a point in crime and punishment that is, in many ways, the true crucible of the novel. We've left the suffocating streets of St. Petersburg, the intellectual labyrinth of Raskolnikov's mind, and the moral complexities of his confession behind. Now, we're transported to the stark, unforgiving landscape of Siberia, to the Katorga, the penal colony. This isn't just a change of scenery, it's a journey into the deepest, most resistant parts of the human soul. This is Chapter 10, The Siberian Exile, and we're going to explore the slow, agonizing process of regeneration in the prison camp, a transformation that is far from simple or immediate. When Raskolnikov arrives in Siberia, the external punishment begins, but the internal one, the one he inflicts upon himself, is far from over. If anything, it intensifies, manifesting first and foremost as a profound, almost cosmic, alienation from his fellow convicts. Imagine stepping into a world utterly foreign, where every social cue, every unspoken rule, every form of understanding you once relied upon, is null and void. That's Raskolnikov's reality. He was a man of ideas, of grand theories, of intellectual superiority, even if he was starving in a garret. He lived in his head, in the abstract. Here, in the Katorga, he's surrounded by a brutal, visceral reality and by men who are, for the most part, entirely different. These aren't university students debating philosophy or disillusioned intellectuals pondering the fate of humanity. These are hardened criminals, peasants, former soldiers, men of action, of raw instinct, of simple faith, or simple depravity. Their suffering is physical, their language coarse, their concerns immediate: food, warmth, survival, the petty hierarchies of the camp. And Raskolnikov? He remains locked in his own intellectual prison. He still views himself as fundamentally different, as superior. He can't relate to their grimy jokes, their practical discussions, their occasional outbursts of camaraderie or violence. He looks at them, and he sees a chasm. He finds their simplicity, their lack of a grand philosophical framework for their crimes, almost insulting. He, the man who murdered for a theory, now finds himself among men who might have murdered for a few kopecks, or in a drunken rage, or out of simple revenge. They are ordinary criminals, and he considers himself anything but. This feeling, this condescension, doesn't go unnoticed. The other convicts sense it, acutely. They feel his disdain, his aloofness, his intellectual pride radiating from him like an invisible barrier. And they resent it deeply. They're quick to pick up on pretension, on anything that smacks of superiority. They're often cruel to him, mock him, even physically assault him at times. They call him a gentleman in a derogatory way, reminding him of his former status, highlighting his current fall. He, who dreamed of being an extraordinary man, is now shunned by the very ordinary men he sought to transcend. It's a bitter irony, isn't it? He expected respect, or at least a grudging understanding of his complex motives. Instead, he gets scorn and isolation. Even Sonia, who faithfully follows him to Siberia, sitting quietly outside the barracks, offering silent support, seems to be the only bridge to humanity he has left, a bridge he often pushes away. And this brings us to the second crucial point, the one that makes his path to redemption so agonizingly slow, his lingering pride and his stubborn refusal to accept that he was wrong. This isn't a story of immediate repentance, not by a long shot. Dostoevsky understands the human heart too well for such simplicity. Raskolnikov doesn't confess because he truly believes his actions were morally reprehensible in the conventional sense. He confesses because he failed. He was weak. He couldn't live with the burden. He couldn't be a Napoleon. He wasn't the extraordinary man he thought he was. Think about that for a moment. He doesn't regret the murder itself, not intrinsically. He still CLI. Chapter 11, Resurrection. Hello again, my friends. Welcome back to our journey through the winding, often harrowing, but ultimately illuminating corridors of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. We've traveled far, haven't we? From the claustrophobic streets of St. Petersburg, through the fevered mind of a young intellectual, into the abyss of his crime, and the torturous landscape of his guilt. We've watched Raskolnikov wrestle with his theories, his conscience, and his humanity. And now, at this point in our narrative, chapter 11, we find ourselves, and him, in a place of stark, unforgiving reality, the bleak, icy expanse of Siberia. The time stamp marks not just a moment in our video, but a critical, almost sacred turning point in Raskolnikov's story, and indeed, in the very soul of the novel. This is resurrection. And the goal for this chapter, our singular focus, is to bear witness to what I believe is the most profound, the most transformative experience Dostoevsky offers us, the final breakthrough of love and humility. For so long, Raskolnikov has been imprisoned, not just by the walls of the Siberian penal colony, but by the impenetrable fortress of his own mind. His pride, his intellect, his cold, calculating logic, the very dialectics that he believed would elevate him above ordinary men, these have been his chains. He confessed, yes, he even went to Siberia, but even there, for a long, agonizing year and a half, he remained aloof, isolated, intellectually arrogant. He despised the other convicts, viewed his crime not as a moral failing but as an intellectual miscalculation. He hadn't broken morally, he'd merely failed to be extraordinary enough to get away with it. The shame wasn't in the act, but in the capture. That's the kind of tortuous, self-serving logic that kept him spiraling, kept him from peace. He was sick, we're told. Not just physically, but spiritually. His soul was in a fever, a delirium far worse than any bodily ailment. And then, one day, one seemingly ordinary day in the infirmary, as he lay recovering from his illness, a profound shift occurs. A moment of grace, sudden and unexpected, like a shaft of sunlight piercing through thick, Siberian clouds. The key moment, the absolute heart of this resurrection, unfolds when Raskolnikov is outside, by the riverbank. Sonia, his unwavering beacon of hope and love, visits him as she always does. She's been there for him through everything, enduring the scorn of the other convicts, her love a constant, silent presence. He's been distant, often cruel, but she remains. And now, on this particular day, something snaps within him. Picture this, the cold, biting wind, the vast, desolate landscape, the murky river flowing endlessly. Sonia, standing nearby, her face etched with concern, her quiet strength a stark contrast to his internal tempest. And then, he does it. Without a word, without a conscious thought, as if an invisible force simply compels him, Raskolnikov suddenly throws himself at Sonia's feet. This isn't a performative act. This isn't part of his intellectual game. This is raw, primal, absolute surrender. He falls, and in doing so, his entire edifice of pride, of intellectual superiority, of cold, calculating reason, collapses around him. He presses his face into the ground, into the dirt, and his hand reaches for hers, clutching it, weeping. Weeping for the first time in what feels like an eternity. Sonia, at first, doesn't understand. She trembles, she's bewildered. Has he gone mad? Is this another of his strange, tormented moods? But then, as her eyes meet his, as she feels the intensity of his grip and the profound, cleansing torrent of his tears, she understands. She understands everything. It's not the tears of a broken man, but the tears of a man finally, utterly, humbly redeemed. He's not weeping for his suffering, he's weeping for his sin, for his alienation, for the profound mercy she has shown him, and for the simple, overwhelming truth of her love. And what happens next is just as crucial. He tries to rise, ashamed of his tears, but she holds. Chapter 12, Epilogue and Modern Reflection. Alright, here we are. The final stretch. We've journeyed with Raskolnikov through the murky, labyrinthine corridors of his mind, across the sun-baked, dust-choked streets of St. Petersburg, and into the chilling embrace of his own carefully constructed, yet utterly destructive, philosophy. It's been a winding, at times claustrophobic, at others profoundly illuminating, experience. And now, as we reach the very end of his story, and ours with him, it's time to step back. To breathe. To synthesize everything we've seen, felt, and wrestled with. This isn't just about wrapping up a narrative, it's about drawing out the enduring wisdom, the unsettling truths, and the surprising comfort that Dostoevsky, in his unparalleled brilliance, wove into every fiber of crime and punishment. We're going to summarize this incredible journey, yes, but more importantly, we're going to apply its timeless philosophy to our very modern world. Because, trust me, its echoes are everywhere. Let's begin by looking at the spectacular collapse of Raskolnikov's grand theory. Remember, at the core of his actions lay this idea of the extraordinary man, a utilitarian calculus of sorts, where a superior individual could transgress conventional morality, even commit murder, if it served a greater good, or perhaps, simply for the audacious thrill of proving his own exceptionality. He saw himself as a Napoleon, a historical figure justified by the scale of his ambition and the supposed benefits of his actions. This was, in essence, an extreme form of what we might call rational egoism, the belief that acting purely in one's self-interest, guided by reason, is the most logical and effective way to live, even if it means sacrificing traditional ethics. But what happened? Did Raskolnikov achieve liberation? Did he become the glorious, unburdened Superman he envisioned? No. Absolutely not. The immediate aftermath of the murders wasn't one of triumph, but of psychological torment so profound it crippled him. His carefully constructed rationale crumbled under the weight of his own conscience. The intellectual scaffolding he built couldn't support the raw, primal reality of having taken a life. He became a prisoner long before he was ever arrested. A prisoner in his own mind, haunted by the specter of his victims, isolated by his secret, and plagued by a debilitating fever that was as much spiritual as it was physical. Dostoevsky, with this masterful portrayal, is essentially tearing down the foundations of such purely rationalistic philosophies. He's arguing that human beings are not, and cannot be, solely rational machines. We are creatures of emotion, of spirit, of conscience, of an innate need for connection and love. To deny these fundamental aspects of our being in favor of a cold, calculating logic is to court madness. Raskolnikov's reason told him one thing, but his very humanity screamed another. The split in his name, Raskol, meaning schism or split, perfectly encapsulates this internal rupture. Think about it in our modern context. How often do we encounter iterations of rational egoism? The hustle culture that sometimes prioritizes relentless self-advancement above all else, often at the expense of others or even one's own well-being. The rise of hyper-individualism where collective good is often dismissed in favor of personal gain. Or even in the more insidious forms of online discourse, where empathy is often seen as weakness, and a detached, almost clinical, reasoning is applied to justify harsh judgments or dismiss the lived experiences of others. We rationalize cutting corners, exploiting systems, or even just being unkind, all in the name of getting ahead or protecting ourselves. But Raskolnikov's journey serves as a stark warning. This path, divorced from genuine human connection and a moral compass, ultimately leads to a profound emptiness, a spiritual destitution far more terrifying than any external punishment. It traps us in a prison of our own making, isolating us from the very humanity we strive to transcend. This was, in essence, an extreme form of what we might call rational egoism, the belief that acting purely in one's self-interest, guided by reason, is the most logical and effective way to live, even if it means sacrificing traditional ethics. But what happened? Did Raskolnikov achieve liberation? Did he become the glorious, unburdened Superman he envisioned? No. Absolutely not. The immediate aftermath of the murders wasn't one of triumph, but of psychological torment so profound it crippled him. His carefully constructed rationale crumbled under the weight of his own conscience. The intellectual scaffolding he built couldn't support the raw, primal reality of having taken a life. He became a prisoner long before he was ever arrested. A prisoner in his own mind, haunted by the specter of his victims, isolated by his secret, and plagued by a debilitating fever that was as much spiritual as it was physical. Dostoevsky, with this masterful portrayal, is essentially tearing down the foundations of such purely rationalistic philosophies. He's arguing that human beings are not, and cannot be, solely rational machines. We are creatures of emotion, of spirit, of conscience, of an innate need for connection and love. To deny these fundamental aspects of our being in favor of a cold, calculating logic is to court madness. Raskolnikov's reason told him one thing, but his very humanity screamed another. The split in his name, Raskol, meaning schism or split, perfectly encapsulates this internal rupture. It's the ultimate failure of an ideology that posits human beings as mere components in a grand, logical scheme, rather than complex, irreducible individuals endowed with a soul and a capacity for suffering and love. Dostoevsky was reacting to thinkers of his time, like Chernyshevsky, who championed this kind of cold rationality, promising a utopia built on self-interest. Dostoevsky's reply was brutal, a self-inflicted hell. Think about it in our modern context. How often do we encounter iterations of rational egoism? The hustle culture that sometimes prioritizes relentless self-advancement above all else, often at the expense of others or even one's own well-being. The rise of hyper-individualism where collective good is often dismissed in favor of personal gain. Or even in the more insidious forms of online discourse, where empathy is often seen as weakness, and a detached, almost clinical, reasoning is applied to justify harsh judgments or dismiss the lived experiences of others. We rationalize cutting corners, exploiting systems, or even just being unkind, all in the name of getting ahead or protecting ourselves. We hear phrases like, "It's just business," or "everyone's out for themselves," as if these statements absolve us of any moral responsibility. But Raskolnikov's journey serves as a stark warning. This path, divorced from genuine human connection and a moral compass, ultimately leads to a profound emptiness, a spiritual destitution far more terrifying than any external punishment. It traps us in a prison of our own making, isolating us from the very humanity we strive to transcend. The grand plans fall apart because they forget the irreducible, messy, and deeply spiritual nature of being human. They fail because the human heart, no matter how much the intellect tries to silence it, demands something more. Which brings us, rather organically, to the second crucial takeaway, the often uncomfortable, yet ultimately necessary, role of suffering in growth. Raskolnikov's suffering wasn't a flaw in the system, it was the mechanism of his salvation. It wasn't just punishment, it was purification. From the moment he lifted that axe, his life became an unbearable agony. And it's important to note, this suffering was largely self-inflicted, a consequence of his own actions and beliefs. It broke him down, yes, but it also stripped away his intellectual pride, his arrogance, his belief in his own exceptionalism. It was in this brokenness, this utter degradation, that he became receptive to something beyond his own INTE. 7-Day Action Plan, the Anti-Raskolnikov Audit Dash. Alright, my friends. We've journeyed deep into the labyrinthine mind of Raskolnikov, wrestled with his perplexing theories, and felt the chilling grip of his profound isolation. We've seen firsthand where unchecked intellectual pride and a warped sense of superiority can truly lead, not just to destruction, but to an agonizing spiritual wasteland. But Dostoevsky, bless his tortured, brilliant soul, didn't just give us a stark warning, he also painted a path, however faint, however arduous and painful, towards something resembling redemption, towards a glimmer of hope. And that, dear listener, is what brings us to perhaps the most crucial, most actionable part of our exploration today. Because understanding is one thing, a purely intellectual exercise. But acting on that understanding, bringing these profound philosophical battles, these timeless moral quandaries, into the messy, beautiful reality of our own daily lives, that's where the real, transformative magic happens. That's where Dostoevsky's genius truly blossoms into relevance for us. So, let's stop just observing Raskolnikov's harrowing descent and instead, proactively choose a different ascent. Welcome to our 7-Day Action Plan, the Anti-Raskolnikov Audit. This isn't about becoming a perfect saint in a mere week, nor is it about solving all your existential woes overnight. No. It's a series of practical, bite-sized exercises designed to do exactly what it says on the tin, to gently, yet firmly, check our own inherent arrogance, to begin dismantling those tiny, insidious superiority complexes we all, to some degree, harbor, and most importantly, to fundamentally, authentically reconnect with our shared humanity. Think of it as a spiritual detox for the soul, a profound reset button for your often overlooked empathetic circuits. And trust me, the sense of peace and connection it offers is far more rewarding than any intricate, isolated intellectual theory you could ever concoct in a dusty, dimly lit room. Let's dive in, shall we? Days 1 to 2, audit your resentments and superiority complexes. This is where we get truly, deeply uncomfortable. Raskolnikov's grand, destructive theory of extraordinary men wasn't born in a pleasant vacuum, it simmered in a bitter stew of deep-seated resentment against the world, against perceived societal injustices, against those he ruthlessly deemed ordinary and unworthy. He constantly judged, categorized, and looked down upon practically everyone, from his long-suffering landlady to the very people he claimed, in his twisted logic, to want to hell. This pervasive intellectual pride, this insidious feeling of being inherently above the common fray, was the insidious poison that began to spread, slowly corrupting his very essence. Your first 2 days are about identifying and confronting your own, perhaps milder, versions of this internal struggle. Grab a pen and a fresh sheet of paper, or open a private, secure document on your computer. This isn't for anyone else's eyes but yours. This is your intensely personal, utterly honest confession booth. Exercise, take an honest, unflinching look at who you secretly resent, or perhaps openly dismiss. Not just a fleeting, momentary annoyance, but those deeper, more persistent, simmering resentments that tend to linger. Write them down. Be as specific, as painfully honest, as you possibly can. Is it a colleague who, in your subjective opinion, seems to always get ahead without, in your estimation, truly deserving it? Is it a particular group of people whose opinions or lifestyles you tend to dismiss out of hand, perhaps with a sigh? Is it someone who, in your mind, seems to embody everything you passionately don't want to be, and you find yourself secretly feeling superior to them? Perhaps it's an entire demographic, a particular political leaning, a specific lifestyle choice that reliably triggers a dismissive eye roll or an exasperated sigh within you. Now, here's the truly crucial, introspective step. For each named resentment, ask yourself, with genuine curiosity, why? Spec. Top 3 key takeaways. Sound of a gentle, reflective background score fading in and then settling low under the narration. All right, my friends, we've journeyed through the labyrinthine streets of St. Petersburg, delved deep into the tormented mind of Rodion Raskolnikov, and witnessed the chilling consequences of his desperate ideology. We've seen the darkness, the despair, the glimmers of light, and the raw, unvarnished truth of the human condition. It's been a profound, often uncomfortable, but ultimately transformative experience. Now, as we near the conclusion of our exploration of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, it's time to distill some of that immense wisdom. This isn't just a story, it's a living, breathing philosophical treatise wrapped in a gripping psychological thriller. And like any great work of art, it leaves us with indelible truths, lessons that echo across centuries and speak directly to our own lives. So, let's talk about the absolute gold, the absolute core of what Dostoevsky wants us to carry forward. We're moving into what I consider to be the top 3 key takeaways from this masterpiece. These aren't just plot points or thematic elements, these are profound insights into morality, psychology, and the very nature of redemption. The distilled wisdom, if you will, of Dostoevsky's genius. Let's dive in. Takeaway 1. no human is above the moral law, isolation destroys the soul. This is perhaps the most immediate and visceral lesson crime and punishment throws at us. Raskolnikov, in his intellectual arrogance and desperate poverty, develops this theory of the extraordinary man. He believes certain individuals, like Napoleon, or a future great scientist, are not bound by the same petty moral rules as the common herd. For the sake of a greater good, they can transcend, even violate, conventional morality, commit a beneficent crime, as he puts it, without genuine guilt. The murder of the old pawnbroker, to him, is merely the crushing of a noxious insect, a logical step towards proving his own exceptionalism and securing funds for his noble aspirations. But Dostoevsky doesn't just argue against this theory, he dramatizes its utter fallacy with devastating precision. The moment Raskolnikov's axe strikes, the moral law, far from being transcended, comes crashing down on him with the force of an avalanche. His initial justifications crumble into dust, replaced by an excruciating, relentless internal torment. This isn't just about the external fear of being caught, though that's certainly there, it's about a profound sickness of the soul, a spiritual fever that consumes him from the inside out. He becomes estranged not only from society but from himself, from his very humanity. Dostoevsky shows us that the moral law isn't some arbitrary set of societal rules. It's something deeper, intrinsic to the human spirit, woven into the very fabric of existence. To violate it is to violate oneself. Raskolnikov's suffering, his paranoia, his delirium, his desperate attempts to rationalize and then his equally desperate attempts to escape his own thoughts, all serve as irrefutable evidence that no human intellect, no matter how brilliant or self-assured, can simply declare itself exempt from the fundamental moral principles that govern our species. The universe, or perhaps the human psyche itself, has a way of balancing the scales, not necessarily through external punishment, but through the internal, inescapable burden of guilt and despair. And this leads directly to the second, equally crucial part of this takeaway: isolation destroys the soul. Raskolnikov isn't just intellectually isolated, he's physically and emotionally isolated even before his crime. He lives in a tiny, coffin-like room, rarely ventures out, and pushes away the very few people who care about him: his mother, his sister Dunya, his loyal friend Razumihin. His grand theory is cooked up in the crucible of this extreme solitude, where there are no external voices to challenge his twisted logic, no human warmth to temper his cold intellectualism. After the crime, this conclusion and cta. Well, here we are. We've journeyed through the labyrinthine streets of 19th century St. Petersburg, peered into the tormented mind of Rodion Raskolnikov, and grappled with some of the most profound questions Dostoevsky ever posed. Crime and punishment isn't just a story, it's an experience, a visceral exploration of conscience, guilt, and the elusive path to redemption. And I hope, as we've navigated its depths together, that you've found not just answers, but perhaps even more compelling questions to carry with you. As our time with Raskolnikov draws to a close, a central theme, one that pierces through the very core of our shared human experience, lingers in the air like the oppressive heat of a Petersburg summer. It's the seductive whisper, the dangerous allure of a single, powerful thought: what if I am an extraordinary man? What if I am, in some fundamental way, above the rules that bind ordinary mortals. Raskolnikov, brilliant and deeply impoverished, theorized that certain exceptional individuals are not only justified but obligated to transgress moral laws if it serves a greater good, if it advances humanity. He believed he was one such man, destined to clear away obstacles, to cut through the mundane, moralistic clutter that held society back. He saw himself as a Napoleon, but one with a higher, more philosophical purpose. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, he acted on that belief. But let's be honest with ourselves, truly honest, in this quiet space we've created together. Have you ever felt that temptation? Maybe not the temptation to commit a heinous crime, certainly not to wield an axe against an old pawnbroker. But have you ever, in the quiet solitude of your own thoughts, harbored the idea that your circumstances, your intellect, your understanding of a situation, made you an exception? Perhaps it's a small thing. A moment when you felt justified in bending a rule that seemed arbitrary, because you knew better. Or perhaps it's a more significant internal conflict, that nagging voice suggesting your ambition is so profound, your vision so clear, that the usual ethical boundaries are merely suggestions for lesser minds. That perhaps you deserve a shortcut, or a different set of standards, because your potential contribution is simply too great to be constrained by pedestrian morality. Think about it. We live in a world that often celebrates individual achievement, exceptionalism, and disruption. We're bombarded with narratives of great men and great women who broke the mold, who dared to defy convention. And while there's immense value in challenging outdated norms, there's a razor-thin line between revolutionary courage and self-serving arrogance. Dostoevsky, through Raskolnikov, forces us to confront that line. What are the internal costs of believing you are above the rules? Raskolnikov's suffering wasn't just the fear of capture, it was the agonizing, soul-crushing isolation that came from his self-imposed separation from humanity. His theory, meant to elevate him, instead plunged him into a hell of his own making, severing his connection to love, empathy, and genuine human contact. His carefully constructed intellectual fortress became his prison. His extraordinary man theory, designed to liberate him, instead enslaved him to his own tormented conscience. This isn't just a historical curiosity, it's intensely relevant today. In an age of unprecedented access to information, where everyone can curate their own reality and echo chambers amplify our convictions, the temptation to believe our perspective is the only righteous one, that OU group's rules supersede others, is more insidious than ever. The danger of dehumanizing those who think differently, of creating hierarchies of worth based on ideology or perceived intellect, echoes Raskolnikov's initial premise, albeit on a broader, more societal scale. So, I invite you, as we close this chapter, to really sit with that question. In what ways, subtle or overt, have you ever felt the allure of believing you are above the rules? What were the J? Thank you for listening to this audiobook. If you found value, meaning, or inspiration in this journey, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Your support helps us bring more timeless classics to life. See you in the next reading.